Hey everybody, Chris, the old-ass retro gamer here. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that has been on my mind for quite a long time. I've actually been wanting to make this video for at least a year and a half, and that topic is forgotten franchises that I would love to see return. It's taken me so long to talk about this topic because as I keep collecting, I keep rediscovering franchises that I remember loving back when they were first introduced, back in the 80s and the 90s, and even in the early 2000s. So I've really had to work hard to try to narrow this list down to 10 choices. So many to choose from, I could probably make video upon video on this topic, but today I'm going to talk about 10 of my all-time favorite franchises I would love to see a new sequel to, or even a reboot of the series if possible. So let's start things off with a series that started out on the NES, developed by Rare, which is one of my favorite developers of all time. There's 3 games for the NES. There was Wizards & Warriors, Iron Sword, Wizards & Warriors 2, and then Wizards & Warriors 3. And then there was a Game Boy game called Wizards & Warriors 10, Fortress of Fear. A lot of platforming. I remember the original game was difficult as all hell, but the series came into its own in the second game, which was Iron Sword, which is my favorite in the series. What happened to parts 4 through 9? That's why I added this franchise to this list. With the release of the Rare Replay for the Xbox One, a lot of people were reintroduced to a lot of these games by Rare, and with games like Shovel Knight and Axiom Verge and all these other 8-bit styled games that are coming out digitally that are getting rave reviews and players seem to love them, why can't Rare make an old 8-bit version of Wizards & Warriors 4 for download over the Xbox Live Arcade? Capcom made Mega Man 9 and 10 for download for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Why can't Rare do something similar? Next would be an old school franchise, a shoot 'em up. We haven't gotten an R-Type game in quite a long time. As far as I remember, the last R-Type game came out for either the PSP or the PS2. Out of all of the shoot-'em-ups that are out there in the 80s and the 90s, I have the fondest memories of playing R-Type. When I bought Super R-Type for the Super Nintendo, which was one of the first games I ever bought for that console, the difficulty was just frustrating enough, but not enough to make you want to stop playing. I always wanted to play it just a little bit more, see if I can get just a little further than I did the last time. And on top of that, it's super fun. They always had great music. The graphics were always really nice. And man, there were ports for every freaking console out there. I would love to see a modern day R-Type game, either just a remaster of the original game or just another game in the series. We don't get that many great shoot-'em-ups anymore, which disappoints me in the extreme, but we all have Soldner X2 to tide us over until the resurrection of the R-Types. Next would be a franchise that began on the PlayStation 1 and never really went anywhere else. While on the surface it may look like just another survival horror clone, it actually ended up being much more. It is more of a sci-fi thriller. You play as 3 main characters in the original game, and you can switch between them. The graphics are very nice, cel-shaded. One of the first games I remember ever trying to look cel-shaded before it was actually a thing. Very interesting story, puzzles, all that kind of stuff that you would expect from survival horror, but done very, very well. And then a year later, a sequel, which was actually a prequel, came out, which introduced a 4th character that you could play as, and in a really cool twist that was something that was not prevalent in video games back in the 90s, like at all. Of the 4 main characters you can play as, 2 of them were female, and they kind of had the hots for each other. And I applaud the makers of the game for having the flat-out brass balls to go through with it, because it helps set the game apart from everything else that was out there. Both games were fun, they had great stories, the characters were likable. While it does have the tank controls that everyone is used to, you can run and shoot at the same time, which is pretty cool. You can even dual wield, which is rad. There was a 3rd game planned to come out for the PlayStation 2. It was canceled for whatever reason, and we have not seen anything with this franchise for a long time, until I think it was last year. Square Enix owns the property now, and they actually put it up for anyone to purchase the rights to develop games based on it. And there was a Kickstarter for a game called Fear Effect Sedna. It's like an isometric Shadowrun Returns type of game with animated cutscenes and puzzles and all that, and it's not really what I wanted to see when it comes to a new Fear Effect game, so I'm still holding out hope that if Sedna is successful and gets enough people behind it, that Square Enix will actually try to develop a full-on third game in this series. I would be super, super happy to see that happen. Next would be a beat-em-up that started out on the Genesis and also never really went any further than that. Everyone remembers Streets of Rage if you're a gamer in the 80s. Man, that was the game that defined the Genesis for me. When that game came out, that was when I said, I need that console. It wasn't Sonic. Awesome beat 'em up, great moves, great graphics, awesome music by Yuzo Koshiro. It was fun, the controls were tight, and then there was a sequel, Streets of Rage 2, which improved on it exponentially. More characters to play as that were different, more varied. I love playing as each and every one of them. Yuzo Koshiro returned. Awesome music. I own the soundtrack on vinyl, for crying out loud. The sprites were bigger. Everything about it was just more grandiose. I felt like it was pushing the Genesis to its absolute limit. And then there was a third game that came out for the Genesis, and it wasn't too great. It was censored from what they got in Japan. I did have it back in the day, and I did not think it was all that great. But there was rumor that there was a fourth game in the making, but it ended up getting canceled and turned into Fighting Force, which was quite awful. And that was it. The series was dead. That is a classic franchise. If they can bring back Double Dragon like they did in Double Dragon Neon, they can bring back Streets of Rage. Sega is still mining Sonic for all it's worth. Why can't they resurrect some other franchises to help balance things out? You know, give us another Echo the Dolphin. That would be awesome too. Give us another Streets of Rage. Give us another Shinobi game, like a real Shinobi game. Next up is a series of games that have gone through many iterations. The original 4 games in the series, first one came out on the Master System, 2, 3, and 4 came out on the Sega Genesis. Then it branched out into this Phantasy Star Online series that started on the Dreamcast. There were so many of those games in that series, it's just confusing. Make the brain hurt! But I'm basically talking about the original RPG series. I always loved the sci-fi-ish world that the series took place in. I'm a huge sci-fi nut. I love reading science fiction books. I love science fiction movies. I love science fiction themed games. Naturally, since I love science fiction, I was drawn to the Phantasy Star games. I love the characters in each game. Maybe not the third one. Yeah, not the third one, no. I love the combat in the second game. I thought it was really cool and fun. When I finally did get around to playing the first game, I loved the dungeons. The 3D graphics for the dungeon crawling. Holy crap, I didn't know an 8-bit console can do that kind of stuff. I know the story kind of wrapped up in the 4th game, but why couldn't there have been another one that started off a new series with a new storyline? The Final Fantasy games always kind of had a different story for each game. Different world, different rules, different everything. And now that I've seen Final Fantasy drop in quality the way it has over the years, don't know anything about Part 15 yet. We'll have to wait and see on that. Now would be the perfect time to reintroduce Phantasy Star to the world of gaming. Next would be a game franchise that I've talked about before. One of the games in the series is in my top games of all time list video that you might have seen a couple years ago. There have been 3 games in this series. The series started out on PC. The first game was ported over to the Sega Genesis. The first game was more of just a skirmish game where you just had matches between 2 players or 1 player versus a computer with spaceships battling each other. There really wasn't anything to it. The second game came out for the PC and was also ported over to the 3DO, which I've said it before and I will say it again, is a very underrated system that gets not enough love from gamers. Hashtag truth! Part 2 is one of my all-time favorite games. It's just rad as hell. It does have that skirmish mode in it if you want to play that. I usually don't. I go for the adventure mode, which is a massive undertaking. The creators of the game created this entire set of galaxies for you to explore. You can do whatever you want, but if you want to beat the game, you have to try to follow these clues to go from planet to planet, recruiting aliens to help the humans overcome the Urquans who have subjugated Earth. It kind of has this 7 Samurai, Magnificent 7 feel to it, where you're recruiting alien race after alien race trying to help you out and save humanity. It is rad as hell. It is hard. It takes a lot of trial and error to beat the story mode, but it's well worth it. It has a great ending and a great story, and lots of awesome characters to interact with. Sense of humor like none other.
This is a sad tale, so do not even try to contain your tears.
Awesome, awesome game. Star Control 3, only for PC. There was never a port to this for any home console. I did own it for the PC, but I could never really get it to run all that well, so I never got to experience the story mode. I hear it wasn't all that great when compared to the second game, which saddens me in the extreme, but, you know, it is what it is. And then after that, the series just stopped. I don't think Star Control 3 sold very well, which sucks, but maybe if it got a port to one of the home consoles, that might have changed, but it wasn't meant to be. And I would just love to see a Star Control 4, if at all possible. With games like Mass Effect that have an entire galaxy out there that you can explore at your own leisure, I can imagine what a modern-day Star Control game would look like. I would be so down for that, you have no idea. Next is a franchise that had a minor resurgence, actually just recently, but not as a sequel. It was a remaster of the original game. Abe's Odyssey came out for the PlayStation 1. There was a sequel called Abe's Exodus, and there was a couple of Game Boy games. There was Oddworld Adventures 1 and 2 for the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, and then there were multiple spin-offs that came out after that, not all featuring Abe, which I thought would have been kind of cool if he was the common thread in every game released in the Oddworld series. And once Munch's Odyssey and Stranger's Wrath came out for the Xbox, that was it for the series until the new and tasty version of Abe's Odyssey came out for the PlayStation 4 as a digital download. But the thing about Oddworld that I always loved was the world it took place in. Oddworld. Duh! In the first two games, you're playing as Abe, who finds out that the place where he's working is where his race is being turned into food. Abe ain't having none of that, so he leads a rebellion against his oppressors. It's a cinematic sort of platformer, kind of like Flashback or even Prince of Persia. I love those types of games. When the original Oddworld came out, it really filled this void that I felt was missing when it comes to platformers, because everyone was trying to go 3D on the PlayStation, and this kept it old school. This kept it 2D, and it did it really well with great graphics, great music, great mechanics. I love the characters. Abe is kind of adorable, and the world that the games take place in is interesting, which is why they're able to spin it off in so many different directions. But for some reason, the series just stopped. I'm assuming that Stranger's Wrath just didn't sell very well, and they called it quits after that, which was a damn shame because it had way more places it could go. Because, like I said, it was this creative world that they had just really started to explore in different ways with different characters to play as. So I would love to see a resurgence of Oddworld. And now that that new and tasty has become as big as it has, maybe it will. The next franchise is a series of games that came out for the Sega Dreamcast. I do believe it was an arcade game first, but it really gained popularity on the Dreamcast with the ports that were developed for it. At the time Power Stone came out, I had never played anything like that. It's part beat 'em up and part one-on-one fighting game all in one, except it's more of like a party game where, yeah, you can beat on one other person, but you know what? You can play with 4 people at the same time. I became absolutely addicted to the original Power Stone on the Dreamcast. I must have played it for about 6 months straight. I mean, I had other games that I owned for the Dreamcast at the same time, but I would always come back to Power Stone more than any of the others. While the camera was kind of a pain in the ass, and items that were in the level that you would be fighting in would be getting in the way of what you could see, it was just such a fun, fast-paced game. It was just psychotic. And then games like Spawn and Heavy Metal, Geomatrix for the Dreamcast kind of fed off the speediness of Power Stone to create this sort of arena brawler type of game that was popular on the Dreamcast. That I'm surprised it didn't continue past the second Power Stone game, which also came out for the Dreamcast. Just as good, crazier, faster, more characters. Can't complain. I love them both. Part 2 is actually quite a pricey game nowadays, so if you can't find it for at least under $50, But with like these online games that everyone seems to enjoy nowadays, you know, the Call of Duties and the Battlefields and the Battlefront, everything has to have an online mode in it nowadays, which would be perfect for Power Stone. Am I grasping at straws here? Can you imagine playing an online game of Power Stone? That would be insanely awesome. There you go, Capcom. Looking for a few extra bucks that doesn't come from Resident Evil? Bring back Power Stone. I guarantee it'll be a top seller. The next franchise I would love to see make a comeback began its life on the PlayStation, and I remember vividly looking at the back of the box of the console and seeing a screenshot of the game pictured on the back of the box and going, I need that in my life. It was a top-down action RPG type of game where you play as this vampire who has to suck the blood out of his victims in order to survive. And I remember the first few times I pulled that off while playing the game, when you see this line of blood come from your enemy all the way to your mouth and refills your health a little bit, I was like, we're here. This is the next generation of games. The original Legacy of Kain game isn't all that great. There's cool stuff in it, has a lot of great ideas, just not really pulled off all that well. And that's where the sequels come in. There was these spin-offs called Soul Reaver. There was 2 of those that starred this character Raziel that was pretty awesome. That became a 3D platformer, and Defiance had Kain in it and Raziel, which is amazing.
In the arms of the angel.
And the series just ended there. And like most of the other games on this list, the reason why it never continued was the last game in the series price didn't sell very well. I don't know. All I do know is that I would love another Legacy of Kain game. If Twilight didn't ruin vampires forever, and people are still clamoring for anything regarding vampires, I think the franchise is still viable. Either a remastered version of the original Legacy of Kain game that actually fixes all the problems that I had with the game, where it just didn't feel complete. Either a remake of Legacy of Kain, a whole new game in the series that brings back Raziel, or maybe another Soul Reaver game. Can you imagine Soul Reaver 3 made with today's graphic capabilities? Picture Uncharted with vampires. And my final choice for a forgotten franchise that needs to come back, like right now, you're probably going like, oh, Chris, I saw that coming a mile away. Well, yeah, because it is my favorite game of all time. I think I talked about this in another video where Square Enix had a survey that they were asking gamers to participate in, where they were asking what franchises from our past and Enix's past would you love to see make a comeback at some point. You bet your ass I typed in Actraiser. The original Actraiser came out for the Super Nintendo, as did its sequel. Half of it is a side-scrolling action game complete with bosses, a lot of swordplay, awesome music by Yuzo Koshiro, and the other half of the game is a god simulator where you play as a little angel who's trying to direct the people of the world that you are trying to rebuild to fight back against the monsters that have been oppressing them and repopulate the planet. It is just so addictive. I mean, you have no concept of the amount of times I have played Actraiser from beginning to end. I cannot describe how much I love that game. The sequel, not so much. The sequel decided to go strictly with side-scrolling action levels, forgoing the God Simulator, which I thought was an integral part of the first game and is what made me love it as much as I did, because the balance between the action and the God Simulation was absolutely perfect. But no, for part 2, it's strictly action, 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 and not even the kind of action from the first game, because now your main character is kind of like an angel. He has wings, and he controls like shit. The game is so goddamn hard and poorly designed that it is not fun at all. And that's where the series ended, because part 2 was considered such a disappointment that Enix just said, we're done with that one. Let's move on to something else, like this Brainlord game. Yeah, I see that going places. Not that Brainlord's a bad game. It's not. It's actually pretty good. Can you imagine what a remake, modern day remake, of Actraiser would look like nowadays? That would be the most insanely awesome thing ever. Part SimCity, part brawler in 3D. I would absolutely lose my mind if that happened. Or if we just got an Actraiser 3. I mean, Square Enix was interested in knowing what games that they had in their backlog that might be brought back. If they made an Actraiser 3 that kept to what the original game was, where it was a side-scroller, not 3D, not any of that kind of stuff, just a simple side-scrolling beat-em-up with that God Simulator again, man, you'd have to peel my underwear off me. I'd buy 2 copies of it. One to play and one to just look at. Like, hey girl, how you doing? As long as it's not like part 2, because part 2 is doo-doo. Yeah, I said doo-doo, and I'm an adult. Live with it. I know Actraiser isn't the most popular franchise out there, and the possibility of actually getting another game in the series is extremely slim. I'm still holding out hope that it could possibly happen one day. Please, Square Enix, make an Actraiser 3 or a remake. And that's my list of 10 game franchises that I would love to see make a complete comeback. I can see some of them happening, not all of them. Maybe 1 or 2, at most. What franchises that you absolutely love from back in the day would you love to see make a comeback? Let me know in the comments below, because I would love to hear what your choices are. And in the meantime, give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, share it on your favorite social media site, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. So until next time, I am Chris the Old Ass Retro Gamer signing off. Everyone remembers Iron Sword for the cover of the game, which featured frickin' Fabio, of all people, as the main character. Now you know why so many kids back in the 80s had a copy of that game. Because their mother would be at the department store thinking, maybe I should buy my kid a new game for that Nintendo thing of theirs. And they'd be looking through the selections in the case, they'd be like, ooh, Fabio, that's the one. So kids have fun playing the game, the moms have fun looking at the cover. And maybe doing something else.